Thank you for joining me this evening for the Anchor to Messiah program right here on HRN Revive TV. Today's teaching is titled Exchange of Hearts. If you're anything like me and you hear the words exchange of hearts, the first thing that comes to mind would be two people falling in love. Another generic definition of exchange of hearts would mean that one is willing to give their life and everything with it to another and hopes that the other party will do the same. Which makes me think of John chapter 15 and verses 13. Yeshua said, "Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." Also, in addition to that, exchange of hearts could also mean that when the other party you have exchanged hearts with is broken, then you're broken. And when they're at peace, you too are at peace. In other words, whatever your friend or spouse feels and partakes of, you too will feel and experience. The psalmist writes this in Psalms chapter 147 and 3. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Also, Zephaniah chapter 3 and verses 17 reads, "The Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love. He will exult over you with loud singing." Which explains that when we suffer, he too suffers with us and rejoices with us in our rejoicing. This type of relationship through exchange of hearts isn't specific to just a marriage covenant between a man and a woman, but from a friend to a friend, a brother to a brother, and a sister to a sister. The first passage of Scripture that comes to mind regarding this subject is 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verses 3, regarding the story between David and Jonathan. And it reads, "As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt." If you notice, this passage states that Jonathan stripped himself of his robe, armor, sword, bow, and belt, and gave them to David. Also, we see that David and Jonathan's hearts were knitted together. In other words, they were walking in unity and their hearts were bonded. So when we apply this to our spiritual walk with the Messiah, what are we willing to exchange or give up for Yeshua, since he gave us his all? In other words, when we enter a covenant with Yeshua, what is it that we exchange with one another? What do we give him, and what does he give us? We'll cover more of this at the end of this presentation. So if we look at a marriage covenant between a man and a woman, we know that a wedding ceremony is more than just a physical ceremony between two individuals, but more of a spiritual ceremony between two hearts that are joined together by exchanging vows before the Creator. We also know that traditionally the bride would take on the bridegroom's name. In other words, the bride would take on the identity and character of her husband, and they become one flesh. So we can now see the spiritual side of this. We can also see this in the covenant between Abraham and Yahweh. Abraham's name is changed to Abraham simply by taking on a portion of the Creator's name, Yahweh. And also Sarai becomes Sarah. In doing so, the Creator places his identity and character in Abraham and in Sarah, just as he places his name on us. So when looking at an ancient Near Eastern covenant, and by all means I am no scholar on this, but typically there would be an exchange of things such as gifts, clothing, armor, robes, weapons, etc. So what did Abraham exchange with Yahweh, and what did Yahweh exchange in return to Abraham? Very quickly, let's outline a few scriptures of an ancient Near Eastern covenant between two parties, beginning with Genesis chapter 17, verses 9 through 11. And God said to Abraham, "As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you." So we can make a connection with this verse in Matthew chapter 26, verses 27 through 28. And he, Yeshua, took a cup. And when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." Then going back to Exodus chapter 24, verses 7 and 8, and it reads, "Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, 'All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient.' And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, 'Behold the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words.'" And then moving to Genesis chapter 15 and verses 1. "After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. 'Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be great.'" Notice what Yahweh says, "I am your shield," which we can connect this with Ephesians chapter 6 and verses 13. "Therefore take up the whole armor of Yahweh, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm." And the last one is Isaiah chapter 59, verses 16 through 17. "He put on righteousness as a breastplate, and a helmet of salvation on his head. He put on garments of vengeance for clothing, and wrapped himself in zeal as a cloak." So, in the Abrahamic covenant, we can clearly see that there was an exchange of things. We also see later how Abraham offers up his only son Isaac as a sacrifice. And Yahweh promises to bless the offspring of Abraham because of Abraham's obedience. And if I could paraphrase, it was Yahweh saying to Abraham, "If you take care and teach my children and your household my ways, then I'll do the same by sending my only son, Yeshua, into the world as the ultimate sacrifice, and his spirit will lead all people to truth." We read later that Abraham dies, and Yahweh is eternal. And being that this was a unilateral covenant, Yahweh is required to act since he took on the responsibility in this covenant in the beginning, which means that he is still bound to the covenant. And even up to this day, Yahweh is still blessing and caring for Abraham's children, even you and me today, who are the children of promise and are in covenant with him. So, what did Yahweh give us as part of the covenant? So, what portion do we have here on earth as it is in heaven? First, we are the kingdom of priests and have been given the full armor of Yahweh, which consists of the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the belt of truth, the shield of faith, the gospel of peace, and the sword of the Spirit. And if we are believers in Yeshua, then we are clothed in his righteousness. If you remember the story of David, David said to the Philistines, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel." By doing this, David refused to put on Saul's armor, but instead he trusted in Yahweh and put on the full armor of Yahweh. David surrendered his flesh and his own self-protection by making and exchanging his will for the will of Yahweh. And so should we. In Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 through 33, it reads, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days. declares the Lord. I will put my law, my Torah within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. So, as I bring this session to a close, I want to encourage you with this. And like I said earlier, I am no scholar on this subject. I just want to bring those simple elements in this presentation. In simple terms, Yahweh says, I don't want your materialistic things. I don't want your vanity. I don't need your big fancy house. I don't need your fancy and luxurious cars, big boats and ATVs and so on and so forth. And I don't need your money. Yahweh is simply saying, all I want is your heart. He is saying, give me your heart and I'll give you mine. He is saying, if you would only have a heart change and turn from your ways and turn to me and my ways, then we can exchange hearts and other spiritual gifts. And when we do this, Yahweh begins to write His heart, His Torah on our hearts. And then we can become one together in love, and we can bond. He is saying, let's exchange hearts today. Cast your cares on me because I care for you. God so loved the whole world that He gave and sent His only Son in exchange for our sin. So that's all for today, and I hope you have enjoyed this teaching. And until next time, shalom.